Acharya Shri Srimad Bhagavatam Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitilila Pravishna Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivraj Acharya Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Nitilila Pravishna Om Vishnupada Srila Gaurkishwar Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Nitilila Pravishna Om Vishnupada Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai Jai Nitilila Pravishna Om Vishnupada Vaishnava Sarvabhaum Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gauriya Vaishnava Guru Varga Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasant Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol All Glories Samudavaris Hare Krishna All Glories Samudavaris Hare Krishna All Glories Samudavaris Hare Krishna All Glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga All Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So, we're reading today from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 9, and I believe it's text 43. Yeah. So there's no purport to this text, so I think we will all read text 43 together, and then afterwards I will read text 44 and the translation and purport there. At least that's what we do in Sydney, I'm sure. That's what we do here as well. Sarva Veda Mayenedam Atmanatma Yonina Prajasrija Yatha Purvam Yascha Mayanusherate Sarva Veda Mayenedam Atmanatma Yonina Prajasrija Yatha Purvam Yascha Mayanusherate Sarva Veda Mayenedam Atmanatma Yonina Prajasrija Yatha Purvam Yascha Mayanusherate. Sarva, all, Veda Mayene, under complete Vedic wisdom. Idam, this, Atmana, by the body. Atma, you. Atma Yonina, directly born of the Lord. Prajaha, living entities. Srija, generate. Yatha Purvam, as it was herein before. Yaha, which, cha, also, mai, in me, anusherate, lie. Translation. By following my instructions, you can now generate the living entities as before, by dint of your complete Vedic wisdom, and the body you have directly received from me, the supreme cause of everything. So, then quickly now I will read text 44. I'm assuming it's not written up there, so it'll be a little bit difficult for you to follow along, so I'll just say it myself. Maitreya uvacha tasma evam jagat shastre pradhan purusheshvaraha praje vyajedyam svena rupena kanjanabhastirodate. And the translation for that is, the sage Maitreya said, after instructing Brahma, the creator of the universe, to expand, the primeval Lord, the personality of Godhead in his personal form as Narayana, disappeared. And then we have the purport. Before his activity in creating the universe, Brahma saw the Lord. That is the explanation of the Chatushloki Bhagavatam. When the creation awaited Brahma's activity, Brahma saw the Lord, and therefore the Lord existed in his personal form before the creation. His eternal form is not created by the attempt of Brahma, as imagined by less intelligent men. The personality of Godhead appeared as he is before Brahma, and he disappeared from him in the same form, which is not materially tinged. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 9th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Brahma's Prayers for Creative Energy. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Goratvise Namaha. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasavi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, my voice is still a little bit weak from the past few days, so trying to get as much emotion into it as I can, but my sincerest apologies if I'm a bit prickly. So we're reading today this conclusion of Brahma's prayers for creative energy as Brahma assists in the manifestation of this material universe. Very interesting, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary upon this text, he says that actually this creation is rather easy. For Brahma, he is simply creating the bodies, right? He is not having to manifest too much. He's simply having to assemble all of these things together. But this is rather interesting, because nevertheless, Brahma requires knowledge in order to do so, right? The underlying reality of this whole chapter is not simply Brahma's empowerment. We know in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, it's written that there's 2 types of Avesh empowerment. There is, of course, we all know, what is the popular form of Avesh empowerment we hear about? Shakti Avesh, right? So, and that is when the Lord empowers with some potency in order to achieve a purpose. However, in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, we also read that there is Bhagavad Avesh, which is when there is a full empowerment, at which point there is not simply one energy empowering, but instead it is almost as if all energies are empowering. And in that moment, the capacity of such an empowered personality is non-different in the sense of potentiality, than to the Supreme Lord. So we do hear that there is a great amount of empowerment in Brahma. And yet, nevertheless, because of course Brahma is listed as the archetypal example of such a Bhagavad Avesh avatar, however, we see that knowledge is the underlying principle upon which this creation is built. And so we can understand, right, that knowledge precedes all things. Knowledge precedes creation. Knowledge precedes reality. Srila Prabhupada, in his purport, he has very nicely identified, right, that the form of the Lord, it is not a creation of Brahma. It precedes the creation, and it continues to exist eternally, as we very famously hear in the Brahma Samhita. It is Satchidananda Vigraha, right? It is an eternal form. So, seeing the nature of this, we can understand that knowledge is not something that we can ever be devoid from. In fact, knowledge is essential. Sometimes in the bhakti path, we can get very ambitious, right? We often hear this, oh, what is the point of reading books? I'm chanting Hare Krishna. I'm chanting the holy name, right? And our great example that we often hear is, oh, well, Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. He was unable to read. He was virtually illiterate. Is that not the case? And yet he was the guru of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, right? He was such a great personality. In fact, we hear that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada had such a great intellect that it said he never read a book before graduating school. Because simply anything his teachers would tell him would enter into his ear and then would enter into his mind. He never needed to revise. He never needed to study. He simply understood everything he heard. So sometimes we'll hear this. People will say, oh, why do I need to engage in study of Shastra? Why do I need to engage in the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books? Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, simply by immersion in the holy name, he's having such a deep realization. And so it can seem a compelling point. But we have to think, Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, what is the quality of the holy name that he is chanting? Are we chanting Shuddha Nam on such a platform that by associating with the holy name, we can instantly immerse ourselves in that non-different reality where Nam and Nami, right? The name and the holder of the name are one and the same, and we can attain such knowledge. This is unlikely, right? Furthermore, we can also conceptualize that Srila Prabhupada has very wonderfully told us all that we should study his books. And thus, if we do not study his books, we will be rendering the great offense of Gurur Avagya, right? Rejection of the instruction of the spiritual master. And then not only will our chanting not be Shuddha Nam, it will be Nama Parad. But on an even deeper level, if one were to ask Gaur Kishore Das Babaji about the Siddhanta, about the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, it would not be that Gaur Kishore Das Babaji would not be able to answer. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji would not say some apasiddhanta. He would be able to fully articulate the nature of the science of Krishna consciousness. So we can see, regardless of his position, knowledge still was present in him, and knowledge still continues to be present in all of the great devotees who are guiding us upon the path of Krishna consciousness. So in this way, we see that knowledge is absolutely essential, not only spiritually, but materially as well. This is the nature of the Shastras. Sometimes people, they get in a mindset of thinking, oh, well, I like Srimad Bhagavatam. It tells me spiritual things, but I will ignore its guidance on material existence. This is a bit too heavy, right? I like Krishna running around with the gopis. I like Krishna lifting up Govardhan Hill, but the teachings of Rishabdev, they're a bit too heavy, right? I don't wish to hear these heavy aspects of our material nature. But what do we see here? This Chaturshloki Bhagavatam is again being respoken. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually says, because of course it's a little bit confusing, this purport. Did we not hear the Chaturshloki a few months ago, right, in the second canto? So did we not see the Chaturshloki a few months ago in the second canto, right? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says actually this is the second giving of the Chaturshloki within this chapter. So we can be a little bit confused as to the nature of this knowledge. We can think it only pertains to spiritual life and says nothing about materiality. But what do we see here? This whole material universe, it is being manifested under the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam. So it is not that we can cut and select, right? That, oh, Bhagavatam tells me about my spiritual life. Bhagavatam tells me about the spiritual domain, but it does not tell me about my material existence. Instead, we can see here very clearly that it underlines this material existence. I remember I was at university and I was speaking with one of my friends, and he does a degree called political economics. And so political economics, the whole idea of the degree is that it's an economics degree which is oriented towards resolving political issues. So regular economics is just about analyzing markets, how to make money. Political economics, they think we have inequality, we have all of these issues. How do we resolve them through all these systems? And so he's a very intelligent person, right? He has some sort of scholarship to study all of this. And we were discussing all these different points. And I remember he was saying, oh, we don't have any resolution for this, we don't have any resolution for that. And I said, oh, I have a very interesting academic resource I can send you. And so I sent him Srila Prabhupada's purports to Ishopanishad. I was sending them bit by bit. And he was saying, wow, this is resolving so many issues, right? So many problems that I was very confused about, this is resolving. And I was thinking, here's a person who's engaged in full-time study of this issue, right? He can quote all of the great economic thinkers. He's learned German just so that he could understand Karl Marx thoroughly in the original language, right? And yet simply by just reading a few purports of Srila Prabhupada, that knowledge is completely dwarfed. So we can see here this transcendental knowledge. It is not that it is not relevant to material existence. In fact, it resolves material existence. We hear this in the Shikshashtakam, right? Cheto darpana marjanam, right? Cheto darpana marjanam, the cleansing of the heart. Well, it is complete upon the engagement in this Sankirtan process. So what does this mean? We know that with all of the processes, varnashram, right? Karma yoga, all of these various things, they are done for which purpose? If you ask somebody, I don't know how many people have done Bhakti Shastri or doing it, right? You'll ask somebody, what is the goal of karma yoga, right? What is the destination? As often we hear, what is the destination of a Brahmavadi? What is the destination of a Jnana Yogi? We will ask these sort of questions, right? But the question of what is the goal, what is the destination of a karma yogi is actually not very clear. Because the destination of a karma yogi is in fact to be qualified in order to perform Jnana Yoga, or hopefully, much more better, Bhakti Yoga, right? So, why then is Karma Yoga enlisted? It is enlisted so as to purify the self, so as to be purified, so as to practice any of these things. The goal of Karma Yoga is in fact Cheto Darpanam Marjanam, right? But what do we see very wonderfully by this transcendental chanting of Hare Krishna? We know the Shikshashtakam. It begins at the beginning and then at the end it's very rasic, it's very intense, right? But we see right at the beginning, the first words of the Shikshashtakam are telling us that here, the goal of Varnashram, the goal of Karma Yoga, the goal of all of these things has already been fulfilled simply by the chanting of Hare Krishna. So, it is not that this transcendental knowledge's purpose is to resolve our material situation. It is not that this transcendental knowledge's purpose is to provide necessarily cleansing, but by its superior position, it will automatically fulfill all of these things. So, we can see in this way that knowledge is so essential upon the path of Krishna consciousness, but not only Krishna consciousness, but any endeavor whatsoever. And we see this throughout history, right? There are many instances of apasampradayas, of bogus movements, right, that are born from what? Primarily sentimentalism and a lack of attitude and care towards the pursuit of knowledge in Krishna consciousness. There is one group that I find very amusing. I've forgotten what they call themselves. But what they say is, oh yes, Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he came. And we all know, Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is an incarnation of Radha and Krishna together, right? In one sense, he's not an incarnation, of course, right? He is avatari. But in another sense, he has crossed over into our material existence. And in that sense, we can consider him to be a descent, right? So there is one group, right, that said Radha and Krishna, they have come together in this form of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And coming together in this form, right, now his pastimes, they've completed. So now our Guru, he is the second Mahaprabhu. And he is the incarnation of Balaram and Revati, right? And they become very ecstatic. They begin to dance and they say Jai, right? There's Krishna Chaitanya and there is, who is Radha and Krishna. And then there's Balaram and Revati. We all know Revati is the wife of Balaram, right? So, in this way, we see they very sweetly are speculating absolute nonsense, right? We can think of another group, the Ativadis. We know very famously Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he imprisoned a lot of bogus teachers, and the Ativadis were rather popular in Orissa. And they were founded by a personality named, I believe his name was Jagannath Das, or at least that's what his followers call him, right? And he claimed to be a follower of Haridas Thakur, although that relationship soured somewhat. And what was his position? It wasn't even that he did not appreciate knowledge, right? It wasn't even that he did not appreciate the understanding of the Shastras. It was that perhaps he appreciated his own knowledge a bit too much. Very famously, he went up to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We all know Mahaprabhu in his later pastimes, right? If anyone were to approach him with any writings, who would they have to go through? Does anyone know? Swarup Damodar, right? And he would see, is the rasa vichar correct? Is there a correct mood? Is there a correct attitude in what is being written here? But this Jagannath Das, he just blasted through. And he went straight up to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he said, oh great Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you are Krishna, and I'm Srimati Radharani. And he said, and not only is this the case, but I've added some extra 5 chapters to Srimad Bhagavatam. Here are some texts that maybe will help illustrate the point a little bit better. And so he was speaking like this. Of course, we can know already, by immediately identifying as Srimati Radharani, this is a complete lack of knowledge. Why? Because we know Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's whole purpose is to solely identify as Srimati Radharani. When we read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, at the very beginning of Mahaprabhu's pastimes, he is very Krishna-like in form, right? He's manifesting the universal form, right? He's doing all sorts of things. But from the moment that he takes sannyas, he begins to erode away that mood. Krishna starts going in the background, and Srimati Radharani starts coming in the foreground, right? Very famously in Ratha Yatra, Mahaprabhu, he sees Jagannath, and he says, oh Krishna, I'm Srimati Radharani, I am here. In fact, sometimes people, they get confused reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, because normally when we read the account of somebody's life, we hear there is the Adi Lila, which is the birth, right? There's a Madhya Lila, the life being lived out. And then in the Antya Lila, normally we hear, right? Prabhupada Antya Lila, we hear about the disappearance pastimes. But where does Chaitanya Charitamrita end? The Shikshashtakam, right? So this is a little bit confusing, right? We don't hear how does Mahaprabhu wrap up his pastimes? How does he conclude everything? But this is because we are not looking at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes in the timeline and chronology, in the process that he himself proposes. The reason why Chaitanya Charitamrita concludes with Shikshashtakam is because at that point, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has fully immersed himself in the moods of Srimati Radharani, which again is the point we were mentioning earlier. At the end, it gets very rasic. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur, he identifies these texts as being texts that were spoken in the full mood of Srimati Radharani. So that is why we conclude Chaitanya Charitamrita with the Shikshashtakam, because that is the completion, that is the fulfillment of Mahaprabhu's pastimes, right? He has come for a mission, he has come for a purpose. And on the one hand, that is to spread Harinam Sankirtan, but that could be achieved by any Yuga avatar. But the specific purpose of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is to experience that mood. So, when this personality comes up to Mahaprabhu and says, I'm Radharani, this is so very painful for Mahaprabhu to hear, because Mahaprabhu is thinking, no, I'm Radharani, right? This is why we see one of the other Apasampradayas, the Gaur-Nagara Apasampradaya. They will have all of these pastimes of Krishna, and they will depict Chaitanya Mahaprabhu inside them. So if you see their artworks, they will have the Rasa Leela, but instead of Krishna in the center of the Rasa Leela, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is deeply upsetting to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because the last thing he wants to do is remember that he's Krishna. Right? Sometimes people, they ask the question, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, why does he stay in Puri, right? Why does he not go to Vrindavan? Vrindavan, of course, such a rustic and elevated place, right? And yet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he does not dwell there. He does not stay there. And the reasoning is, we know Uddhava, very famously, he goes to Vrindavan and he meets all the Vrajvasis in order to convey to them Krishna's message. Of course, later on we'll hear Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he says, Uddhava, Balaram, Krishna, their reputations have been ruined. Because all of them go to Vraj, and when they go to Vraj, they say Krishna will return. And Krishna, he does not return. So Uddhava, he goes to Vrindavan, right? And he goes and he meets all the Vrajvasis, and he speaks with all of them, and he tries to console them. Of course, it's described by some acharyas that Uddhava, he goes thinking, oh, I know what I will see. I am, of course, a very beloved devotee of Krishna. I will be able to understand very clearly these personalities. And yet when he arrives in Vrindavan, this is not the case at all. Mother Jashoda, when she speaks to Uddhava, Uddhava tries to console her. And instead, what does she say? She says, whenever I walk through Vraj, all I see are the trees that Krishna would climb up. I see the river, Jamuna Tira Ambanachari, right? I see the river which Krishna would play around. He would take the water and splash everyone's faces with, right? I see all the calves that are now growing older, right? And all of these calves are the calves that Krishna would take care of. You would say that is when my eyes are open. But when I go to sleep and I'm trying to rest myself, all I can do is dream about the pastimes of Krishna. I'm trying so hard to forget him. It is too much pain. But yet, nevertheless, the moment I fall asleep, all I can think about are his qualities. And so I am left with only one other shelter. When I am awake, I close my eyes like this. And I think, at least I will not see any of Vraj, and then I will not be able to remember Krishna. But then she says, the darkness on the back of my eyelids can only remind me of the beautiful shyams on the skin of Krishna. So no matter what I do, whether my eyes are open, whether my eyes are closed, whether I'm awake or whether I'm asleep, I cannot forget Krishna. This is, of course, the elevated position of the Vrajvasis. We are trying so hard to remember Krishna, and yet I'm always forgetting Krishna. The Vrajvasis, they're trying so hard to forget Krishna, and yet it's impossible for them. So in this way, Vrindavan is like a stimulant, right? It stimulates constant remembrance of Krishna. I'm sure we've all had this experience, right? You go to Vrindavan and you almost feel like you're not chanting, right? You feel like you're putting no effort in. It's like the holy name is just being pulled out of you, right? It's a stimulus for Krishna consciousness. So, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, if he goes to Vrindavan, how much will he be reminded? Oh, here is the tree that I used to climb up. Oh, here is where I used to take all the calves. Oh, here is where I used to do all of these different things. And so in this way, Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would not be able to forget that he is Krishna. And that is why he stays in Jagannath Puri. So as we know, Jagannath Puri, in a sense, it is not different to Vrindavan, but it is different enough that Mahaprabhu can feel some distance and he can immerse himself in that mood. So again, this is maybe a bit technical. But with this technical knowledge, we can understand why this Ativadi Apasampradaya is actually an Apasampradaya, and why it is offensive to the mood of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Not only because it has an improper relationship to knowledge, where it is filled with speculation. Also very famously, this founder of this Apasampradaya, he would tell all of his disciples, when you chant like this. You put your hand in front of your mouth, and then you go like this. That is how you should chant. Why? I don't know. So all of this speculation, right? All of this speculation is the groundwork, right? But had there been a correct understanding of the Siddhanta of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, these issues would not arise. And so we should understand that knowledge is so essential in the process of Krishna consciousness. Not only is knowledge essential in order that we do not fall into such traps, but also knowledge must be approached in the correct way. We know in the Chatur Shloki, as has been mentioned by Srila Prabhupada in his purport, the Chatur Shloki very clearly defines, right, that all that which is not connected to Krishna, it is not real. Not in the Mayavadi sense that it is unreal reality, but it has no substantial reality. Only that which is connected to Krishna is true. And so the truth, true knowledge, carries to a degree the qualities of Krishna. And what do we know about the way we must approach Krishna? In the Ishopanishad, we very famously hear that Krishna, the demigods, they cannot approach him. Right? This is a very famous text about the paradoxical nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's qualities. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he writes something very interesting in his purport to that text. He says that all of our senses, they're all presided over by a different demigod, right? That's why it's said in the Putana pastime, there's many different descriptions. We know, what does Krishna do? Right when Putana comes and she is about to poison him, what does Krishna do? He closes his eyes, right? And so there's many different explanations given in Shastra about why Krishna closes his eyes. My Guru Maharaj, he says one very sweet one, that Krishna, he's thinking, because of the influence of Yoga Maya, he is thinking, oh, I'm very scared. Here is all of this poison. And so he closes his eyes and he prays to Shiva. And he says, oh Shiva, you drank the great ocean of poison. Please incarnate on my tongue and drink this little bit of poison so I can survive. So there's all these different explanations that are given. But one that is given is that the demigods that are resting upon Krishna's eyes, he has given them some shelter. Right? And Krishna did not want them to have darshan of this very terrible figure Putana. And so he closes his eyes so they do not have to see her. So in this way, we know that there are demigods presiding over each of the eyes, right? And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he makes a point that if our senses are being presided over by the demigods, right? And the demigods, they cannot approach Krishna. Again, we know in Krishna's Janma Lila, all of the demigods, they had to go to Shvetadvip, right, in order to reach him, right? They couldn't actually go directly, right? They had to go to the Milk Ocean, rather, right? If our senses are presided over by the demigods, right, and the demigods cannot approach Krishna, then what can our senses do? They are inherently limited, and we will not be able to access Krishna, because they are the lesser thing. And the lesser thing can never access and understand the greater thing. So in the same way, true knowledge is like this. We know in Ishopanishad, again, in case you can't tell, in my Bhakti Shastri class, we're doing Ishopanishad right now. That's why all my examples are coming from the Ishopanishad. We know there is the Aroha Pantha and there is the Avaroha Pantha. There is ascending knowledge and there is descending knowledge. Ascending knowledge is with our senses. We are trying to speculate upwards, right? But descending knowledge is the descent of knowledge, and that is true knowledge. Knowledge must be received then in a mood of surrender, because knowledge is inherently tied to Krishna. Again, as the Chatur Shloki establishes. And if knowledge is inherently tied to Krishna, what do we know? Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam praja, right? We must surrender to Krishna in order to access Krishna. In the same way, we must surrender to knowledge in order to receive it. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he makes a point. The first time that we ever start chanting Hare Krishna, I'm sure we all have that memory of the first time we sat down and chanted our rounds, right? Actually, I remember the first time I did 16 rounds was here in New Govardhana. My family, we were visiting, right? And we sat down and I remember thinking, yeah, I'll chant 16 rounds. We got up for Mongol Aarti and I sat down and then before I knew it, I opened my eyes and I was like, oh, the sun has risen and everything, right? I was feeling so absorbed, right? And then the second day, I was chanting and my mind was going here and there and I was thinking of everything, right? So we all know the first time we chant Hare Krishna, it's ecstatic, right? We're like, wow, where has this been my whole life? Then you keep on going and you keep on going. And somehow or another, in a weird way, the nectar kind of dries up. That doesn't mean that the holy name dries up, but in a weird way, it's almost like we appreciate it less. This is a common experience people have. I remember actually my mother, she was once telling me, maybe a few years after she first got initiated, and this was a real wake-up call to her, right? What has happened to my relationship to the holy name? She was chanting and she realized she was going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She was just counting the beads, right, at one point. She wasn't even chanting. She would chant Mahamantra a few times and then she was just counting. We can get in that mindset. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says the reason for this is the first time that we chant, we are so open. We are so open to Harinam. We just say, Harinam, take us where you will. We have no expectation. We have no desire. Somebody has just told us, chant Hare Krishna, and we think, okay, I will chant Hare Krishna. And so we actually approach the holy name with intense surrender, because we have no expectation upon it. We have no desire upon it. We do not wish to impose anything upon it. But then the next time we think, that was a really good time. Okay, holy name, give me this good experience again. And then suddenly the surrender starts to go away. And we don't experience surrender to the holy name as much anymore, because now we are expecting something from the holy name. We are demanding something. We are demanding, give me that wonderful experience. Give me this, give me that, right? And suddenly our relationship goes, because again, truth is related to Krishna. The holy name is Krishna, right? Suddenly that relationship goes from this sweet one of surrender, where the reciprocation is so strong, to one where we're thinking, okay, holy name, this is how you can serve me, So in this way, knowledge must be received in a surrendered way. It is not something that simply can be unveiled by our own endeavors. So this is why we are connected to the parampara, right? And not just any parampara, right? Our parampara, as we know, our senses, right? Our senses do not know anything of their own, right? They only know things because our mind works through them. And our mind working through them allows them to know things, right? Our mind can know our senses, but our senses cannot know our mind. This makes sense, right? I can't take my finger and put it into my thoughts, right? But my thoughts can go into my finger. So, in the same way, the parampara is that expression of the higher principle of Krishna into the reality that we are here. It is the higher thing expressing itself into the lower thing. Which is why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, at the time that he was preaching, traditionally what would happen is at your initiation, you would get a list of all the Diksha Gurus in your line, going back to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You'd be given this list, your name would be there as well, and then Haribol, this is your initiation. And what they would say is there would be different parivars. If we're familiar with Sanskrit, parivar means families, right? There are different families of lineages, right? And so they would say, you are in Gadadhar Parivar. You are in Nityananda Parivar. You are in the family of Nityananda. You are in the family of Gadadhar. And this is the way people would identify themselves. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did not do this. Instead, he composed the Bhagavad Parampara with the different great acharyas who have propelled the understanding of Krishna consciousness, who might not necessarily be in the same Diksha line. The famous example everyone likes to quote is that Jagannath Das Babaji did not initiate formally Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that was Bipin Bihari Goswami, and yet we include Jagannath Das Babaji because that line, that flow of knowledge is there. Because actually it is the knowledge revealing itself, not the initiation, that is the essence of parampara. So sometimes what would happen is the disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, they would ask Saraswati Thakur, they would say, which parivar are we in? Which family are we in? You did not give us the Diksha line. Sometimes people ask us, which family are we in? Saraswati Thakur, he would say, we are in the Bhakti Vinod Parivar. Which is interesting, right? Because normally what would happen is they would list a direct associate of Mahaprabhu. But here is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada saying his father, right? Who had only manifested his pastimes only a few years earlier. Because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he's trying to emphasize the essence over the form. The essence is that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, by his realization, by his knowledge, he is as qualified an associate of Mahaprabhu as the people who engaged in the visible pastimes of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Even in a sense, we are all engaging in the visible pastimes of Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Once, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he was walking with his disciples through Navadvip. And as they were all walking, they were all engaging in kirtan, and there was a dead dog on the street. And of course, if you smell a living dog in India, then they don't smell too good. Now, a dead dog was not exactly a delight to the senses, right? And so all of them, they're walking along, they sort of scruffed up their noses. They're all clearly disturbed, right? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he turned around, he looked at them, he began to chastise them. And he said, all of you are so absorbed in this dead dog, you do not know that Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is dancing with us. And what is the point? If we are engaging in Sankirtan, it is the propagation of Gaura Leela, right? It is the propagation of the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So anyways, in this way, we can see that shiksha, knowledge, this is the essence of parampara. Actually, sometimes people say it is the innovation of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. But actually, if we see in our parampara list in Bhagavad Gita, as it is, the disciplic succession, the first three acharyas after Madhva Acharya were not initiated by each other. The lists change who initiated who, but actually they're all a shiksha relationship. So actually this dynamic has existed before, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he sort of draws out the emphasis. So in this way we see that the essence of our parampara. Again, it is not initiation. People get very excited about initiation, right? And of course we should. Part of that shiksha, part of that instruction is that we should receive initiation. But much greater is the active instruction. We can think, okay, well, I'll have time to discuss it. So we know there's two Krishnas, right? There is the Krishna who appears in Vraj, and there's the Krishna who appears in the prison cell of Kamsa, right? And both of them, they're conceived in different ways. I won't explain the whole pastime because then I will run over time. But it's a very ominous sign. Oh, I'm reading it the whole time. Must end at 8:30. So in Kamsa's prison cell, we know Vasudev, the generation, the conception of this Dwarkanath Krishna, we can say, is a result of mantra, right? Vasudeva is chanting a mantra, and through the mantra, through the mind, then the conception happens. But we read in Gopal Champu that Jiva Goswami says the alternate version that happens in Vrindavan is that Nanda Maharaj, he's constantly having dreams because his heart is empty, not having the association of Krishna. So he's constantly having dreams. And in these dreams, he's thinking, wow, there's this very beautiful blue boy. And he's there with this wonderful Shamsundar skin. And he's holding this beautiful flute. He's so very beautiful. And then he tells Mother Jashoda, I'm having dreams. This very beautiful boy, very sweet qualities. And like this, they would engage in Hari Katha together. And by engaging in Hari Katha, that desire to give birth to this child became so strong in Mother Jashoda's heart that eventually she began Nandanandan Krishna was conceived, right? And so the comparison that's made is that we can see mantra, which is the essence of Diksha, which is very great. It's producing Vasudev Krishna, it's producing Dwarkanath Krishna. This is not a low thing, right? So this is the result of it. But we can see here, by Bhagavad Katha, by Shiksha, the greatest original form of Krishna, Krishna in Vraj, is conceived. So here we can see already in the Goswami literatures, right, well before Bhakti Siddhanta, we are seeing a priority, right, of Shiksha over Diksha, even though both are recognized as essential. So this is the nature of our line, and this is the nature of our parampara. And so our parampara is passing down something very special, something very unique. And what is that thing? We were talking about how our senses cannot capture Krishna, right? But we read very nicely, Kartik is upcoming and it will be very sweet. We all love Kartik, right? And so we will sing the Damodarashtakam, right? Of course it begins, Namamishwaram Sachidananda Rupam, and that whole text goes on. But very interestingly, at the end of that first text, what does it say? It says Mother Jashoda captures Krishna from behind, right? And Sanatana Goswami, he makes a point in his commentary that when somebody is caught from behind, that means they were trying to escape until the very last second, right? Actually, Krishna's eyes, he's rubbing his eyes while he's running away from Mother Jashoda. And it said he's rubbing his eyes, why? Because of tears. But there's two explanations given, and they both work together in a chronological sequence. Initially, Krishna, he's thinking, Mother Jashoda, she has a soft heart. I will rub my eyes so then tears come out. And when the tears come out, she'll stop chasing me. So Krishna, he does this, and like this, he's rubbing his eyes thinking, oh, I'll cry. And then he sees Mother Jashoda's not stopping the chase. So then he's really crying. And then when he's really crying, he's rubbing his eyes so he can see where to go to try to avoid her, right? So in this way, little Krishna, he's running here and there. And then Mother Jashoda, she captures him, right? But Krishna, he does not surrender. His devotees might surrender to him, but he's not surrendering, right? Krishna, he's trying to escape, but from behind, Mother Jashoda has caught him. This is actually a very deep point when we think about it. The demigods cannot even approach him. But Mother Jashoda, simple cowherd woman, but with all of that devotion in her heart, captures Krishna when he's trying to resist, when he's trying to escape, when he's so desperate, when he's using all of his potencies. My spiritual master, he says that when Mother Jashoda is wrapping Krishna's stomach, right, all of the Shaktis in existence are resisting her. But when Krishna sees just that bit of sweat and he recognizes the devotion Mother Jashoda has, Krishna's Kripa Shakti comes out and it conquers all of the other potencies in existence. The Chintya Shakti, all of these other ones just gone. Krishna's heart melting at the devotion that his devotees have for him. So in this way we can see, what do we receive in our line? We are receiving a very elevated devotion, a very intense devotion, something that is not found elsewhere. Vraj is the best kept secret, right? Krishna, he almost leaves it so that other people don't find out about it, right? But what has happened? Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we know Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur describes him as what? A madman. He's gone insane, tasting the moods of Srimati Radharani. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he takes that and he opens it up. Very famously, he tells Rupa Goswami, right, in the teachings to Rupa Goswami, he says, here is one drop of bhakti ras. He gives it to him, right? And with that one drop, Rupa Goswami, in one sense, he is the founder acharya of the Gauriya Vaishnava whole community, right? With that one little drop, it's passed down, right? Passed down generation by generation. We can think that little drop was enough for Srila Prabhupada to drown the whole world with Krishna consciousness. This is what is passing down, right? This is the essence of our line. And so we see, we're talking about the creation today, right? We're talking about the nature of creation, and I will wrap up. The clock is scaring me a lot. But we're talking about the nature of creation, and we know this pastime is called the Shrishti Leela, right? And that is the nature of when this material universe is created, and that has knowledge required behind it. Right? But there's another Shrishti Leela that is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. When Mahaprabhu, when he visits Jagannath Puri, and he walks along and he arrives there, he arrives with all of his associates, and all of his associates, they precede him. Maharaj Prataprudra, he is there, right, with Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya, and they're all there on the top, and they're seeing all of these associates arriving, because Maharaj Prataprudra had such a strong desire to see them. And Maharaj Prataprudra, he describes all these personalities coming. And he says it is like millions of suns have dawned on the horizon of Puri. Advaita Acharya, all of these other great personalities, they're all there walking, effulgent, chanting Hare Krishna. Right? And Maharaj Prataprudra, he says, Oiche Nritto, Oiche Prem, what is this dancing? What is this love? Oiche Horidhoni, what is this glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Shuni, nahi dekhi, right? I have never heard such a thing. I have never seen such a thing. Now this is very special. Jagannath Puri, everything is there. The highest expressions of Islam, the highest expressions of Buddhism, the highest expressions of all Vedic traditions are present in Jagannath Puri. And what does Maharaj Prataprudra say? I have never heard this. I have never seen this. And Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya, Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur writes, Bhattacharya kohe e modhur bachon, right? This sweet sound that you are hearing, Chaitanya Shrishti Prema Sankirtan. This is the Shrishti, the creation of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And it is not just Sankirtan, it is Prema Sankirtan. It is Sankirtan filled with that intense love that can take Krishna, which no knowledge can conquer, which no discipline can conquer, right? But so easily conquers him and makes him want to be conquered by it, right? And that is being passed down by Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Prema Sankirtan, which is his Shrishti, his creation. And that creation is the highest creation that we can conceive. And that creation is one that we should engage in knowledge in the same way that Brahma is, in order to understand. Okay, I think I've gone a few minutes over time, so forgive me for that offense. Shri Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai.